How's it going, everyone? So if you guys are at the stage of your application process where you're turning in your applications or maybe even getting interviews, you've probably heard of the multiple mini interview. Now, if you don't feel like watching this video and you came here for like one resource to make you feel extremely prepared for these MMIs, then I'm gonna have the link in the description to this book by Dr. Samir Desai on multiple mini interviews. It's what I read before I went into my first MMI and it made me feel extremely prepared. So if you don't feel like watching this entire video, I'm gonna have the link below. I think it's like $10. And I'm gonna revisit that book at the end of this video. So if you keep watching, we'll talk about it later on. So MMIs are this new interview style that schools have started to adopt. Basically what it is you have different stations and you go up to each of these stations and there's like a prompt on the door. Now these prompts can range from anywhere between actual patient encounters to just topics to talk about. All schools do it a little bit differently, and so there's not really one specific prompt to study or to learn before you go into your MMI. Some schools use the MMI for the total interview, while other schools use it for like a little portion of it. For example, one school I interviewed at had 9 MMI stations that each were 9 minutes long, and so it lasted about an hour and a half, and that was the entire interview. And then another school I interviewed at had just 2 MMI stations that lasted for about 4.5 minutes, and then they had a traditional interview right after. So it's a new style that's being adopted by a lot of different schools. Whether you're applying this year or next year, I think getting good at MMIs and really understanding it is going to make you feel a lot more comfortable when you go on your interviews. So what should you expect when you walk into an MMI? So basically you're going to have about a minute usually to read the prompt on the door, and it could say, oh, you have a patient in the room who just found this out, and maybe they're crying or they're tearful and they want you to go in there and talk to the patient about it. Or they can say like, this is a new controversial topic in medicine and they want you to talk about it with the interviewer and take a stance. Now the hardest thing about MMIs is for the most part, the interviewer is instructed not to talk to you. They're not going to give you feedback when you're interviewing. They're not going to talk to you when you explain your side of the prompt or kind of your stance on it. They're just going to sit there, they're going to nod their head, and you're going to keep on talking. Now, I will say it actually goes by really, really fast. When I went on my first MMI, I thought it was going to last forever. I thought that I was going to run out of things to talk about, but to my surprise, before I knew it, the time ran out, and I was pretty happy with it. So now you've read the prompt on the door, and they instruct you overhead to walk into the room. So you're going to walk in the room, and a couple things could happen. There might just be one person in there, the interviewer, and that's the only person you're going to talk to based off the prompt. In other situations, maybe there's an actor in the room who's playing the part of a patient, a close friend, coworker, or some sort of person that you need to interact with, while the interviewer is sitting over on the side watching the entire interaction and you are not actually talking to the interviewer. It can be a little bit awkward, but honestly you start to get comfortable with it during your first MMI station, and then it kind of just feels normal from then on out. Now regardless on if it's just the interviewer or it's the interviewer and an actor in the room, you're always going to walk in, you're going to shake the hand of the interviewer, and you're going to say like, hi, my name is Sean, thanks for having me. They'll usually ask you, did you read the prompt? Do you understand the prompt? And you'll say yes. Or if you don't, you can ask for clarification. Sometimes they can say that, yes, you understand the prompt just fine. Sometimes they just say, I can't answer that for you. If you would like to, you can quickly read the prompt again. Usually they have like a notepad in the door. But honestly, in the minute that you have, usually you can get a pretty good grasp on the prompt. Now, my first tip about MMIs is even though it's an interview and you're talking to someone about a scenario or you're talking to an actor about a scenario, they're still going to be looking at stuff like nonverbal cues. Make sure you go in, you shake their hand, you're smiling, you look like you're happy to be there. You're probably going to be nervous, but don't look super nervous because they're still going to be assessing your nonverbal communication skills. And if you're talking to an actor and it's about a very touchy subject, they're going to be assessing your body language, your ability to look empathetic and to really, not look intimidating to the actor, because one day you'll be talking to a patient and you're going to want to have really good body language. You're going to want to have really good bedside manner and good introduction skills like a good handshake and a good greeting with a smile. When you start the scenario, I always like to have a structure. I feel like the reason I felt very successful in my MMIs is because I had a structure for everyone, regardless on if it was an actor, regardless on if it was just a scenario that I had to talk to the interviewer about. I always had a structure, and it goes a little bit like this. I start off by saying my understanding of the topic is that this, and this, and that's my summary. That is the beginning of the conversation. Now, if the station is about something where they want you to take a side, I will always start with picking one side, and I will say something along the lines of, I can understand from this perspective that this, and this, and talk about why this perspective is justified. And then after that, I will go ahead and I'll talk about the other side and talk about why I could also see from that perspective why they agree with this or why they did this or why the entire situation started in the first place from that perspective as well. And so what that does is it really shows them that you can show objectivity and that you can see a difficult situation from opposite ends of the discussion. This is good practice one day because as physicians, we're going to want to be objective. We're going to want to be able to empathize with our patients, and it's just good people skills to have, honestly. And that's one big thing they want to see is they want to see that you can be objective, that you can see a problem from both sides. But then comes the next part where they're usually going to want you to take a stance. Now, regardless on your objective viewpoint or the way that you talked about the objective part of this, you're still going to want to make a stance on one side. The reason is, even though we want to be objective as professionals one day, we're also going to have to make decisions and we're going to have to support those decisions. So once you've talked objectively about both sides, you're then going to start by taking your stance and saying, I feel like it is my responsibility as, the doctor or his best friend or as the school counselor or whatever position or role you're supposed to be in, and take your stance and then back it up. And that's honestly the bread and butter of the MMI. They want to see that you can be objective and they want to see that you can take a stance on whatever side you do decide to choose with good supporting information. Furthermore, they want to see that you can be ethical. They want to see that you can understand someone's ethical beliefs and the way that they see the situation, whether, maybe you're talking to a patient that doesn't want the surgery because of their culture. And they want to see that you can understand that and see it from their perspective and that you have good medical ethics. Or if they give you a scenario where you found out something about a close friend of yours because they were a patient with a doctor who you maybe shadow under, and you go ahead and tell their family because you feel like their family should know, and now you're breaking HIPAA violations and all that kind of stuff. They want to make sure that you have good ethics and that you're not almost like a liability because you don't really have a good grasp on ethics. And when it comes to ethics, I actually do recommend going to the AAMC website. They actually have, I think it's like the 15 ethics or something. I'll have the link in the description, but it's actually like a really good resource that I read right before my first ever MMI. And a lot of the ethical principles that they had on that list were kind of like the topic in the MMI stations. So I definitely recommend going ahead and reading that at some point. And the last thing they want to see is that you have the ability to have compassion. Now, there might be some stations where there's really not a side to choose. And maybe you're doing an actor station and the actor just found out some really bad information and they're crying and they really don't know what to do, and you don't know what to do because you're in the situation and you can't really get through to them. Maybe they're not communicating with you or talking to you. You have to remember that that's probably their job. Their job is probably not to end the multiple mini interview with a smile on their face, and that they just want to see that you can be compassionate to this actor and to say, it's going to be okay, and to maybe take an approach on how you can maybe either cheer them up or get them to be future oriented about the situation and to show that compassion. As providers one day, we might be there for the worst day of someone's life, and they want to see that you can be that compassionate person for that patient one day. And so that's pretty much the entirety of the MMI. Now, a couple extra tips. The actor stations, don't get frustrated if it doesn't feel like you can get through to the actor. Sometimes the actors are going to be argumentative with you. They're going to come back at everything you say. You need to remember that these actors are instructed to do stuff like that before the MMI starts and while they're training to interview medical students. So don't get frustrated if that happens. Don't get upset, don't get mad, and don't sit there and think that it was your fault and you couldn't get through to the person and that you just botched the entire interview, because a lot of the times that is what they're instructed to do. There sometimes isn't supposed to be a resolution in those actor stations. They just want to see that you have the patience to talk to someone who is not necessarily being the most cooperative person. Or in the ethics stations, there might not be a right or wrong stance. And usually there's not a wrong stance or a right stance. They just want to see that you can see it from both sides and that you can talk about it from both sides and take a good stance on it and, have supportive information for your stance. So don't get frustrated if you feel like it didn't go the way you think it should have gone, because a lot of the times it's not necessarily supposed to, but it's how you approach it, how you deal with it throughout the entire, 7 minutes or however long the interview is, that makes that impression on the adcoms, and the interviewer is going to be taking note of all those kinds of things, not your ability to choose a right answer or to get through to the actor in the very end. Also, if you're halfway through the MMI and you realize that maybe you forgot something in the prompt or some sort of information that you had to address that they wanted you to address and you just can't remember what it is, they usually have the prompts in the room and they totally encourage you to take a second, pause and look it over and make sure that you understand the scenario. Even if you're halfway through it, you can take a second to reread it if you feel like you're missing something or you want to adjust something else. That's totally fine. They get it. The nice thing about MMIs is that there are, usually between like 9 to 12 different stations, all with a different interviewer. So the benefit of an MMI is that maybe you do really poorly in one station, but then you like blow another station out of the water. That will average out. And for the most part, you're honestly going to have more good stations than you're going to have bad stations. Some stations will click with you really, really well, where it's like a topic or it's a scenario that you feel really, really good about and that you feel like is more of your niche and that you can talk a lot about it and feel confident the entire time, while other scenarios are just really hard and that you feel really discouraged when you walk out of it because you feel like you didn't give them exactly what you think you were supposed to give them. And then for the rest of your MMI, now you're bummed out. Don't get bummed out by a bad station. Every station is a fresh start. Go to the next station with, open eyes. Forget about the last one. Just don't even remember it. Don't even think about it for the entire rest of the interview. Read the next prompt, move on to the next station, and you're going to be totally fine. Don't freak out about a bad station. Another tip is that some MMI stations will have you just wait in the room even if you finish talking about the position. So say it's a 7-minute MMI station and you only use 5 minutes to talk about it, and after 5 minutes you really don't think you have anything else to say. Some schools will just have you wait in the room for the duration of the time, while other schools will let you maybe go out in the hallway and wait there for the bell to ring and to move on to the next station. Now, if you're at a school where they want you to wait in the room, it's totally okay to just sit there and not talk. The interviewers are usually told to not make conversation with you, to not make small talk, and if you try to make small talk with them, they'll probably say something along the lines of they can't, or they might just not say anything back to you. Now, if you do have to wait in the room and you feel like you have something else to say that you just totally remembered and you want to add it, start talking again. They expect that. They expect you to all of a sudden kind of come up with something and then start talking again, and they're totally okay with it. It's not going to dock you if you stop talking for a minute because you thought you were done, but then you remember something and you started talking again. Just start talking again as if you weren't just stopped for a minute. It's totally okay, and that's what that time is for. So now that we've gone over kind of what the MMIs are like and a couple of tips when you're going through it, we're going to talk about that book again that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Now, before I went on my first MMI, I was working with a medical student and I was telling him about how I was going on an interview the following week and that I had MMIs and I don't know anything about them, and he's actually the one that recommended the book to me. And honestly, that was probably the biggest reason that I felt so good walking into my first MMI interview, and when I walked out of it, I honestly felt pretty good. This book was super, super helpful. It's multiple mini interviews, winning strategies from, I think it's like an admissions committee by Dr. Samir Desai. It's only $10 on Amazon. I'm gonna have the link right in the description. Whether you're interviewing next year or you have interviews coming up in the next couple months, I highly recommend you download this book and read it. It's a super easy read. It only took me like maybe 2 days, and that was like by reading intermittently and really passively. And it was just the best resource that I could have ever found for preparing for this MMI. The book is amazing. It really walks you through every single part of the MMI, starting with why the MMIs were created, who first founded the MMIs, and it even has quotes from schools that utilize the MMI and why they do it and what they look for in their students. Furthermore, it has a bunch of scenarios where the book will actually give you the scenario and then they'll analyze it really quick, and then they'll give you a kind of like a practice or like an example response to the scenario where they're objective and then they take a stance and then that's it. Starting from the point where you walk in the room and shake the hand all the way to when you exit the room. These scenarios are so good to read over, and you could even practice. You could read the scenario, practice to a friend, practice talking to a friend about it, and then see if what you responded with was similar to what the book responded with. It was honestly such a good read. I felt really, really good walking to my MMI, and I am so grateful that this medical student recommended the book to me because I do not think that I would have done as good on my MMIs had I not read this book ahead of time. Also, what's really cool is after the book kind of ends the MMI part, there's like a little bit of information about what it's like once you actually get into medical school and then residency, which you could just continue reading on about, and it's actually really motivational and it really walks you through the rest. I think it's a great book. I'm really happy Dr. Desai put this out, and I think it's going to help a lot of students in the future, especially as schools start to take over the MMI style. So anyways, that's all I've got for this video. I really hope I was able to kind of outline the MMI for you guys and to give you guys tips that might carry on with you throughout your guys' interviews. If you have any questions about MMIs that I didn't address in the video, please comment below or message me through this channel or on Instagram. I'll always reply there as well. Anyways, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.